going to talk about custom elements, which is one of those 4 key features of web components. We've talked about shadow DOM so far. We've talked about HTML templates. We've talked about HTML imports. Now we're talking about the 4th one, custom elements. Custom elements are an important part of web components and probably the most visible part in terms of how you use web components. So let's start with, we have many HTML elements, right? I've just put up a selection of them here. We have our unordered list, our order list, our A tags, etc. When I was writing this, it feels really weird writing like opening tags with not closing tags, or like the wrong business grade exit KCD on how do you annoy a web developer. You just start it with a div and do it with a span. Anyway, so I put the closing tags there for you. So we have all sorts of things. We have these 2 important tags at the end, div and span, that are unsemantic. They don't have meaning. We use those all the time, right? When we don't have a tag for something else. Of course, that results in websites that look like this. Div, 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 div. This is Gmail, I believe. Yeah, there we go. This is Gmail. Lots of divs. That's just how they built the page. And if we see down the bottom, the inheritance chain here, it's like I just picked it out at random here. Yeah, so we end up using divs everywhere, and I think that's, divs work, but they're non-semantic. Semantic means meaning. It means something has meaning. Non-semantic means it has no meaning. Divs and spans are non-semantic in the sense like they don't mean anything, and they're structural elements. Whereas something like an anchor tag does have meaning. It means that that's a link. And an H1 tag means that that's a heading. Divs and spans are non-semantic. Corey House has a quote in his HTML5 Web Components article that says, we're using the div tag all over the place because there's often no better alternative. When Gmail is building out an application, yeah.
It's frozen on custom elements.
Let's see, I can try reloading this. It seems like the presentation is not.
Yeah, just watch it up on the big screen if your computer tweaks.
Yeah, try reloading it maybe.
It's working over here.
Okay, it seems like it's working in a few different places. Yeah, just try reloading your browser if it's not loading. All right, yeah, we're often using the div because there's no better alternative, because there's just nothing better out there, especially when we're building more application-oriented websites. But maybe you're thinking, we have HTML5, right? Don't you know about HTML5? It has all these cool new tags, right? Like we have article, we have aside, we have footer, header, main, nav. Isn't this all we need? First of all, most of these don't do anything. They're semantic, but like an article is just like a div. It's just like a fancy div and we call it an article. And it is helpful for like accessibility purposes and potentially for SEO purposes. But that's really about it. It doesn't really do anything else. And sure, there are some that do, like video, all right? But the rest are just sort of wrappers. This is my proposal here, that HTML elements were created for documents on applications. I think even during the HTML5 time period, when we were sort of building up all these new elements, we get all these new elements in HTML5, most of these are made for documents. We look at these like article, aside, nav. A lot of these are more focused around content-driven sites, document-driven sites, as opposed to applications. And we started to see in recent years this outburst of new interactive applications for the web. Things like Gmail, things like online editors. We even have full IDEs in the browser now. And so all these sort of came about, and I don't think HTML elements really kept up. On MDN, this is what they define custom elements as. Custom elements are the capability for creating your own custom tags and elements in HTML. I think this is huge. This is really interesting. That we're not limited to this list of HTML5 elements or old school HTML elements. We can make our own. And that's really interesting. So that's that next last cornerstone of web components is this ability to make our own elements. All right, so before we get into how to make our own elements, we need to refresh what DOM elements are in general. What are DOM elements? If we're going to be making our own, I think we should understand what they are. DOM elements are just JavaScript objects. I mean, they're special JavaScript objects, but when we're interacting with these APIs, they're JavaScript APIs. Our HTML elements all inherit from HTML element. And so in MDM we have the definition for that. This interface, HTML element interface, represents any HTML element. Some directly implement it, others implement it via another interface that inherits from it. And so what this looks like is we have this...
Can you slide back just 1 second? I just want to read that quote. The HTML element interface represents any HTML element. Some elements directly implement this interface, others implement it via an interface that inherits it. Will you have a code example? I know we've seen that once before, but will you have a code example of the HTML element interface?
So we won't actually see, we'll see code of how to interact with that interface, but we're not, when we say this interface is like interface in the abstract term,
Okay.
these are sort of agreements, contracts of methods that are implemented by these elements. I think we'll see it
like
more.
A JavaScript function or object.
No, we'll see, it's composed of functions, so it's implemented with JavaScript methods, we'll see that.
All right.
And so the inheritance chain kind of looks like this. So for a div, we have HTML div element that inherits from HTML element, which inherits from element, generic element. If you look up methods on MDN, you'll see that a lot of times they're part of, for DOM methods, they're part of either element or HTML element, or if they're unique to your particular tag, they'll be like part of HTML div element or part of HTML input element, or something like that. But that's the inheritance chain. And then we can get collections of HTML elements, so we call that HTML collection. And it's an array-like collection of elements. We've talked about how to convert it to an array. You can just go array.slice.call, array.project.slice.call. I don't worry too much about the mechanics of this, but it allows you to convert an array-like collection to an actual array.
All right, so we go back a second. So HTML collection is an object, a JavaScript object?
It's an array-like object
An array-like object.
for HTML elements for any of these.
Okay, and if we have, that looks like an array on the left, the two brackets.
Yep.
So if we have some array, we could do slice and then call HTML collection, then store that in another variable, set it equal to var my array of nodes
Exactly.
is equal to, and then we have that. What would the array be there then? Like query selector, select all divs?
No, this is just going, oh, so the array here that you're going to get the result, so HTML collection, yeah, it might be a query selector all. There are other methods to select from.
Array right there.
Oh, this is just, what we're doing is we're taking the generic array here, so the generic array object, and we're taking its method called slice, and we're calling it on our collection. And that's how we're going to turn it into an array.
What's the difference between a generic array object and an array?
There are specific arrays that are constructed from this generic object. We don't care about in this case, we don't have a specific array. We just want to call an array method on our collection, and it will return me an array. So this just allows me to convert it to an array.
All right.
Is it the same as like when you create a variable and you keep the brackets empty?
Sort of, yeah. This is just shorthand here. I could also write array, capital A, array.
The .call function is the function on that all functions have that lets you pass in this as the first argument. So normally this is whatever's before the dot. In this case, the empty array or slice. But we want to call slice on something different than this, the HTML collections that.
Yeah, I'm calling a function on a
So the
collection.
easiest one to do is you can't slice. The HTML collection doesn't have a slice method by itself. But with the .call, we can say you act as if it's what is a method on here. Call it.
Exactly. So this is more JavaScript. We won't go into, this isn't unique to web components or even HTML collection. It's just how we convert an array-like object to an array. Yeah?
So if the HTML collection is a paragraph, for instance, applying that method to it would slide and turn everything in its contents as part of an array. Is that
Yeah, so this is going to be a collection of different elements. It's going to turn this into an array.
Okay.
Slice is just going to return me part of an array. And in this case, I'm not saying part of an array, give me the whole thing. So it's just going to turn it in array. This is just how what was that?
Would it be possible just to code that out real quick? I mean, when I see stuff, it's like I want to understand what's on each of your slides, and so if I see stuff I don't
Sure.
understand, and I'm like, hold on, let's stop and let's understand that. And that's why this is much more awesome than watching a training video.
Yeah, let's do
Because
that.
I could just be like, yo, wait, stop. What's that mean?
All right, so if I have, I can actually open console here. I'll just go to MDN. So if I have document.query, selector all, and I select all links, I'm going to have a node list here. A node list, like an HTML collection, is an array-like object. It's not an actual array. So if I say, var collection, I have collection. If I do collection, dot constructor here, it's going to say node list. And then I can say, R equals collection. Nothing in here. Let's see. Let's say array dot slice dot call. And I can do that same thing there. I can do prototype dot slice. I may have been missing my prototype there. Dot slice dot call. And then I can pass in, let's see, collection. And I'm going to call slice on collection. And then I'll have r.constructor is going to be an array, but the r here is still an array of 144 items, which is that same as that node list, except now instead of being a node list, it's an array. So I've cast the node list to an array.
Alright.
This is really, it's casting. It's the way we can cast array-like objects to arrays.
Sure. So, yeah, alright.
So it's slice.prototype.com.
Yes, yeah, I think I missed prototype here, but so this is shorthand for, but array.prototype.slice.call. All right, so other items that we have, so we have properties on our elements that can be used to manipulate those elements. So Innerhtml is a very common one. So Innerhtml as a getter, which means that I'm just calling Innerhtml and say I say var x equals element.innerhtml. That's using Innerhtml as a getter. I'm just going to return what the value of Innerhtml is. And that's going to give me the serialized HTML code, that is HTML code as a string, describing the element's descendants. As a setter, so if I say element.innerhtml equals and I pass in a string, that's going to remove the element's children, parse the assigned string, I give it a string of HTML, it's going to parse that into real HTML, and then assign the resulting nodes as the children nodes of that element. Does that make sense?
No.
Let's demonstrate it.
Wait, so just say it again. As a,
Yep.
in element Innerhtml, as a getter, serialized HTML code describing elements descendants.
Yep.
As a setter, removes elements children, parses assigned string. Okay, got it. So you can use it to get all of what's in Innerhtml and set it to variable, or you could set Innerhtml to something and then.
Exactly.
Okay, got it.
You use it kind of both ways there.
Got it.
And we have element.children, which is just a getter to return the child elements of a node. It's pretty straightforward. We have .className. Again, we can use this as a getter or a setter. So as a getter, this returns the string of the node's class attribute. So it'll return all the one string with all the class names on the element. And as a setter, it will set the string of the node's class attribute. It's class name. Class list. We've talked about this a bit already. Class list is an API that we can use to add, remove, toggle, or check if it contains a particular class. So instead of having to parse out that string, we can use class list to add, remove, toggle, or check if something contains. Contains will give me a boolean true or false. Add, remove, and toggle will actually change the classes on that element. Yes.
So when it says it's a API, does that mean it's not part of JavaScript?
Nope, it is part of JavaScript.
Okay.
It's just an interface. API is a term we use for like programming interface. So in this case, it's a nice little interface for doing add and move and toggle. It's an abstraction. When I say convenient, a lot of times we'll talk about like convenience methods. These are methods that we don't have to have. We could do this all with class name, right? We could add or remove toggle contains. We can do all that. It's kind of a pain because we gotta like check index of, or we have to parse out that string, figure out if we've added a class name twice or something like that. It just is convenience because you don't have to do all that, so it's a lot less work. So it works in newer browsers. All right, query selector returns the first descendant element that matches the selectors passed in. We've used that before. Query selector all returns a collection of descendant elements that matches the selectors passed in. And these are non-live, so that means if they change after, if the descendants of that element change after I make this call, that array is not going to change. It's going to still have those elements that were there when I made the function call. And one of the things on both of these, they're descendants of the element object here. So a lot of times I'll do document.querySelector and document.querySelector all, but I can also call that on descendant elements, and then that will scope that search to that point in the tree and down. Add event listener. This registers an event listener for the specified event type, which is a string, that's the first argument, on the element. And then the second argument is the listener function, the callback function, that will be called when that event occurs. Conversely, we have remove event listener, which unregisters this listener on the specified event type. So we can remove these when we're done.
And you were saying that if you have an event listener attached to some node and you get rid of that node, you also want to make sure you remove the event listener because that just helps with memory performance.
Exactly. Yeah, you always want to get rid of an event listener after you get rid of a node, or you no longer need it. All right, so that was kind of a quick refresher on the DOM APIs. We can go back to custom elements and what that means. But you do want to have a good sense of these. Yeah.
Can you just clarify getter versus setter still?
Yep.
Generally.
That's a part of object-oriented programming and those phrases.
It's just a term to get something as opposed to setting something.
Yeah.
So when you get something, it's just read-only, right? I'm just like reading what that property is. Whereas when I'm setting something, I'm using it to actually change something else.
So something's equal to something.
Well, you know how within our HTML, we could say, hey, paragraph enter HTML, and then set that equal to whatever we want. So that'd be setting, right?
So yeah, anytime you equal sign.
Uh-huh. Or you could say, well, take what's in paragraph enter HTML, and I'll set that equal to this variable, meaning we're getting what's in there. So we can get what's in enter HTML, or we can set what's in enter HTML.
Get it, and then my ID gets from that element.
Exactly. A getter is reading, a setter is writing. That's the difference. A lot of times when we talk about getters and setters, especially in O-level programming, we talk about them as function calls, like get something or set something. In this case, I'm using that term in a very generic sense. I'm saying, we're setting or getting a property, and it sort of works differently depending on how you use that. I added that refresher kind of section in because when we build out custom elements, we're really building DOM elements. And so a lot of times we'll be inheriting from the HTML element as the base for our custom element. And so it's helpful to know how that interface works and how you can extend it and use those DOM methods in the lifecycle of your custom element. All right, so back to custom elements. So this is the magic function call that we get with custom elements. This is what allows us to make our own element. Document.register element. This is the important one. So document.register element takes two parameters. It takes two arguments. The first one is the tag name. That's a string, and that's the name of your element. Tag names must be dash delimited, so you have to have a hyphen in that name.
We kind of saw that with Angular. You could create elements, I think, but it had to be dash delimited.
Yeah, those aren't custom elements in the same way, but it's the same concept.
Yeah.
And the reason that they have to be dash delimited is so you don't clash with any existing HTML elements or future native HTML elements. So it's making sure that you don't, so for example, the video element came about in HTML5. If you had created a custom element called video, you'd be kind of out of luck when the browser came along. Everything you made would break. So they want to avoid that. They want to avoid that situation with the future when they add new elements. So if it's a user-created element or dev-created element, it has to be dash delimited. The second argument here is an object. It's an options object. And the important piece of this object is prototype. So it's a key value pair here. The key is prototype. The value is an object that's your element's prototype. So we'll talk a little bit about this. This is an optional hash. If you don't provide it, the prototype is going to be HTML element. Extends is also, you can also put that on the options object. We'll talk about that in a second. So with prototype, this is the prototype for your element. So in JavaScript, our inheritance works via prototypes. And when you have an element, it's going to look to, or when you have an object, it's going to look to its prototypes for any methods before, and then go up to the chain and see if it has that method. So if the method isn't on the instance, it's going to look onto its prototype, and so on and so on. In this case, I can set a prototype. I'm just going to create an object in isolation here. I'm going to use object.create, which will create me a new object with this as its prototype. I'm just going to grab the prototype for HTML element. And then I'll call document.registerElement and pass that in as my prototype. And so this is where I'm going to, on this custom element prototype, this is where I'm going to attach any methods that I want my element to have. This is where I can start to create my own methods for my element.
Question.
Yes?
So it looks like you're just getting HTML prototype for that variable custom element prototype.
Yes.
Yeah, I guess you also run the object.create, but why couldn't you, do you have to get, does object.create create like a new instance
Yes.
of HTML element.prototype?
Yes.
Could you not pass in just HTML element prototype on the last line there of code?
The problem is I want to be able to extend this. So yes, as this right here isn't interesting, but I want to be able to say custom element prototype dot foo equals function. And now foo is my own function for my element. And now I can start to extend that element. So it actually does something.
Okay.
Because otherwise it's not that interesting. Why am I creating my own element anyway? You know, it's not just so I can write my element name in my HTML. I could do that before. Now what I can do is I can actually add my own methods to the element, which is a lot more powerful. The other method, or the other property in my options object that's useful is extends. And so extends means if I don't want to introduce a tag, I can extend an existing one. And I can do p is my element, which is the name that I passed in. And now I can extend this object, but I'm not actually changing tag name. I'm not going to spend a lot of time, and I'm going to ask you not to worry too much about that, because like a lot of things in web components, it's going away.
Just a tour.
So, they're on Wilson Page's State of Web Components, which was written in June of this year, so a couple weeks ago. He talks about this is equals issue. This is that is extension. He says it's generally agreed that is a wart on the custom element spec. Google has already implemented is and sees it as a stopgap until lower level primitives are exposed. Right now, Mozilla and Apple would rather ship a custom elements version 1 sooner and address this properly in a version 2 without polluting the platform with warts. So it's an interesting choice of words. At the end of the day, this is another one of those things that Google kind of added in, agreed it's probably not a great idea, and has decided to get rid of it. Some people would actually prefer to see it, but it doesn't sound like we're going to have it in custom elements. Custom elements are real HTML elements. That's an important thing to remember. We could never really do this before. We could never really create our own HTML elements. Now we can. They can have their own APIs. They can have their own method calls. They can have their own custom attributes. They can have their own events. And they can also hook into the element life cycles. They can hook into these callbacks that are called at different points in the life of the element. And I have a separate presentation on that, and so we'll go into more detail on the life cycle later on. But remember that these are real HTML elements. And and that's important.
Just a moment on life cycles. If that's the first time you've heard that before, that's like, this is the second time I've heard it. The first time I heard it is in Android programming. They have life cycles on different things. So when something gets created, that's like the beginning life cycle. When it gets destroyed, that's towards the end. And at these different phases in the life cycle of whatever is being created and destroyed, there are certain functions which automatically run if you put code in, and that code will execute at that point of the creation, destruction, existence of that, whatever it is. So that's its life cycle, and there's just points where you can say run this code when it hits this phase of its life cycle. It's kind of like you have life cycles, and so during the day, wake up is one of them, and when you wake up, you can run certain functions because that's what occurs. Wake up, brush teeth. Run that module.
Yes, wake up, drink coffee is usually my
Wake up, drink coffee.
my life cycle. So yeah, we'll dive into life cycles more because that's an important part of components, and we'll kind of look at what those look like. We talk about these are HTML elements, but JavaScript's required, right? We need to do document.register element. That's written in JavaScript. So what happens before JavaScript is executed? I have this element on my page, and the browser doesn't know how to handle it because I haven't registered it.
That looks like a bad word.
Flash of unstyled content, or FOUC for short.
We just need a K at the end.
Flash of unstyled content is this term that's been around for a long time, and it describes this phenomenon that occurs in various situations. When we're talking about flash of unstyled content with custom elements, it's because we have a custom element on our page, but JavaScript hasn't yet kicked in. So we don't know that JavaScript, that HTML element has like a style associated with it from an HTML import. So we don't have any styles associated with it. We can't style it. What happens? Do we see it immediately before the JavaScript kicks in? Eric Beidleman's custom elements, he says, custom elements can be declared or created before their definition is registered, document.register, register element, that's that part, before their definition is registered by the browser. For example, you can declare X tabs on the page, but end up invoking document.register elements X tabs much later. And so that's problematic, right, because we're invoking that after that's already on the page. So how do we style that thing? Well, we have this new CSS pseudo-class called Unresolved. And Unresolved exists on browsers that support custom elements, that support web components. And Unresolved will apply until the created callback, and this is a life cycle callback for an element. Again, we'll get into that later, but created callback happens when we create the element. It applies until the browser calls created callback for the element. And so Unresolved will allow us to put some placeholder styles in, because this CSS will be processed before the JavaScript document.register element is hit. So Unresolved pseudo-class is how we can give some placeholder styles for our element until the JavaScript kicks in and registers that. Does that make sense? You'll get into this more with Polymer next week as well. They have methods for doing this with Unresolved, and that's sort of an important piece of working with custom elements. Eric Beidleman, great quote, like, think of unresolved elements as in limbo. They are potential candidates for the browser to upgrade later on. So the browser will run into this, see X dash something, and go, that's not an element, but it looks like that, that might be resolved later on. Like you might end up registering that later on with document.register element, so I'll apply any unresolved styles you had. So that's how you can do that. All right. What I think was really interesting is this hyphen requirement in the name. I've talked a little bit about why that's kind of required. I think, not only is it's not really just a limitation. It's not just like a downside of not interfering with the browser built-in elements. It's also, I think, a feature and an opportunity for us to do some interesting things. So I think it allows us to name our elements in a creative way. So Maybe you have your own UI collection name, user interface collection name. We've talked about like library names. Slash button, or dash button, right? If you have a button. Or maybe you have, or you're like Bootstrap, right? So Bootstrap dash tabs. Or maybe you have your own company or organization, you're making a custom element, and you can say dash accordion there. And so you can sort of namespace these, and when you look in the HTML, you know what they are. And you think about the possibilities, right? What if Gmail, instead of looking like crazy selection of divs, looked like something like this? What if we had like email app, email message, email dash message, email dash sidebar, and then we had our normal elements down here. What if it was a mix of these elements that sort of had meaning in terms of when we looked at them, they had meaning, as well as our built-in elements? So start to imagine what would applications look like if they weren't just a collection of divs. What if Twitter looked like this, where you had, tweets, and you had tweet-main. You had Twitter profile card at the top. And again, it's a mix of real elements, of HTML elements, and it's a mix of custom elements. And that's fine. You start to imagine what those applications might look like.
Wait, what do you mean, how does it look like? It wouldn't change how they look like.
Not for the user, but from a developer perspective, what would they look like? What would that code look like?
Instead of having div soup.
Exactly. Yes.
But isn't it XML like that? You can actually use whatever you want.
So yes, this is, in a lot of ways, it is similar to XML. Keep in mind, we're no longer using XML on the web like we used to, right? So we don't have XHTML anymore. No one really uses that.
Is this like a callback for XML?
In some ways, it's similar. This is not XML, though. This is HTML. And there's a key difference, right? Because there are rules in XHTML that don't apply here. So while it might look visually like XHTML or XML, it's not. It is still HTML, which is important semantically in how we
Great
think about
observation.
Huh?
Great observation.
it. It is. It's good to see those patterns like between different languages. But this is HTML.
You typed all those up?
I did, yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. That's awesome thoroughness and preparation. That's no small task for one slide.
When you use Emmet, it goes a lot quicker. You can,
No, but that's very cool. I mean, that's a lot of detail. That looks like the real deal.
this is sort of, I don't know, this is when I think of what that might look like. It's really interesting to think of what might our future of HTML look like.
Yeah, no, that's beautiful. I really like it.
And that's really, this idea of a component-driven web. This idea of building up a web, and what if instead of having just elements that we get from our spec authors, from the HTML spec authors, we instead have elements that are developed by the community, elements that are developed by developers like you and I, and the community sort of rallies around them. Maybe there's one particular tabs element or one particular accordion element that becomes very popular. What if the spec authors looked at that, the W3C looked at it, or whoever's making those decisions, and said, hey, we're going to take that and we're going to incorporate that into the browser because everyone's using it. Yeah.
Well, the interesting thing about that is you get, regional vernacular turning into code. So like if you're, a gangster who coded, it'd be like, all my dogs tag, and then there'd be pictures of all your friends or whatever.
You could have some creative elements, yeah. But yeah, it's this idea that, we'll sort of rally around some of these, and maybe these will be community-driven, component-driven.
Yeah, all my dogs.
And that's an interesting idea, I think. That's sort of the promise of web components. Like we've talked about encapsulation and modularity. At the end of the day, it's about community. And it's, what does this look like for the future of the web? And this is one proposal for how that goes. And I think that's really interesting to think about. So, just imagine the possibilities. We'll have some time to work on this afternoon. But when you go home today, think about this. Think about what these apps might look like. What might the app that you're working on right now, or the website you're working on, look like in terms of code? If web components were the norm, what would that be like? I think that's really interesting. We're going to go to some exercises now. So, thanks.